true differentiation has to lie within the company, and everybody at the company has to believe in that and be behind it. Whether it's a product that's completely different, whether that's a customer service approach, whether it's even an accounting or billing unique approach. I mean, there's something that's, beyond just the marketing. So there is a difference, between true differentiation and then distinctiveness, which is more about how are you standing out in marketing? How are you standing out in communications? How are you kind of breaking through the clutter to create awareness and get some stickiness there?
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, I'm excited today because we're going to have a fantastic discussion helping you to understand a little bit more about what it truly means to stand out. And I'm not talking about from a product perspective. I'm talking about from you as an individual marketer, and then subsequently how that will affect the value and differentiation and ability for your organization to stand out. Because I have Stacey Danheiser with me, who is the author of Stand Out Marketing. Now, I've heard stand out a lot, and Stacey, so I'm looking forward to our discussion, but welcome to the show.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Stacey is also a co-author of Valueology and the founder of Shake Marketing, which is a B2B marketing and sales practice. And so she has experience with big brands, some smaller organizations, but then also doing some individual coaching to help build competencies. And that's really what we're talking about today, is the competencies that a B2B marketer needs to have in order to be successful. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so when we start talking about standout, you start talking about the sea of sameness. And I think it's really important. I've been talking about the sea of sameness in a lot of different ways, because when I look at the statistics associated with what B2B marketers are doing, where they're investing, where they're outsourcing, some of the things that they're doing, I see some of the same things being done again and again, but yet they're wondering why their sales funnel isn't being filled when, it seems like their competitors are. So tell us exactly, what does it mean by the sea of sameness?
Yes. Okay. So this came about probably like 3 or 4 years ago. We did some research because we started noticing this trend. Specifically, we looked at the telecom industry to start. We took a website and Twitter scrape of the top 30 global companies operating in the telecom industry. And what we found was that everybody was telling the exact same story. They were using the same words over and over. Their YS story, the essence of that was basically the same. The problems that they solve were the same. And that makes sense. I mean, it's a commodity. They're selling, internet connectivity or telephone connectivity. And so that in and of itself is a commodity. But what we uncovered kind of with that process is that we saw 3 things really stand out. One was the overuse of words that were generic business or technology terms. So services, for example, was mentioned, in the top 10. Business, or because it's technology, network or connectivity or security. So these things were just being overused over and over and over. The second thing we noticed is that a lot of the statements start with we or our, not really what you as the customer can do. So, that's just kind of a marketing language thing, but the majority of it's, we do this, we have 24/7 service, we have great footprint, we have, expansion, we have 100 years of experience. And then third was that there was a lack of proof points. So, especially, it's interesting, I think, even beforehand, before the whole COVID pandemic, but there was this big sort of trend toward digital transformation. So what we were seeing on telecom websites in particular is, we can transform your business. We can help you digitally transform. And when you would peel back the onion, you realized, how can you help me transform? Because that's a pretty lofty promise. It was, buy our service, buy our connectivity, get in our data centers. And there was, what we said is the bridge from here to there was really weak. So they're kind of taking somebody on this transformation journey, and with no proof points or case studies or real life examples, people are just left wondering, is this really true? And we're all really smart consumers now. We're bombarded constantly with marketing messages. So of course, our cynicism goes up a little bit, and the radar goes on of, well, is this really true? Let me dig into this. I don't know if I believe you. So we noticed those three things, and we called this, every customers are lost in a sea of sameness, because when everybody's saying the same thing, the customer doesn't know what to do. They either choose the solution then with the lowest price, or they choose the one that was first in responding to them, or in some cases they don't make a decision at all. They just keep with the status quo and keep doing what they're doing because they're not compelled to make a change yet.
Well, and as you're talking, I started thinking about a lot of factors that go into the sea of sameness that I think you have to kind of look at what we need to do from, for example, a search perspective. Like, so we have to use some of this same terminology, because if people are looking for us, if we don't use those same terminologies, we're not going to be found, depending on where they are in their buy stage and buy cycle, their journey. So then it gets into, how do we look at, some things that we're doing internally that may differentiate us from a culture and an organizational perspective, a product perspective, and all of that. And then therefore weave that in. So it's not a simple answer, is it?
No, exactly. And it is something that what we have found, it's not just a marketing problem either. True differentiation has to lie within the company, and everybody at the company has to believe in that and be behind it, whether it's a product that's completely different, whether that's a customer service approach, whether it's even an accounting or billing unique approach. I mean, there's something that's, beyond just the marketing. So there is a difference, between true differentiation and then distinctiveness, which is more about how are you standing out in marketing? How are you standing out in communications? How are you kind of breaking through the clutter to create awareness and get some stickiness there? So.
Well, and okay. So talking about the complexity, ultimately we have to start being able to figure out a way forward, right? So the question that I like to ask, that I'm going to ask you, I ask everybody, is, what does a B2B marketer need to be asking themselves today?
Well, exactly. I think the first one is, it has to do with standing out, right? I mean, we have to understand what the stages that we're at. There is this complete overwhelm of digital bombardment because of COVID. Everybody rushed online, and now you have real fatigue with Zoom calls, with emails, with social media. So people are getting really sick of it, and it's to stand out in that way. Kind of that's number one. What can we be doing differently to break through the clutter digitally? And then I think the other piece is about really understanding the customer. What could we do that's different that our customers would find useful or valuable? And it's not just a matter of copying and pasting. Well, our competitors are doing a webinar, we must do webinars. Oh, they're starting a podcast, let's go start a podcast. The question is, how in tune are we with our customers, and do we really understand what they would find useful or valuable? So there's a couple of examples. There was one I like kind of in the early days of the pandemic, which is Palo Alto Networks. And so what they did was they started a whole sort of educational hub, where they were polling and talking to some of their own executives. So they were providing a unique perspective to their customers by way of what they were doing internally in their own organization. So saying, okay, we're here with the head of human resources talking about, how to equip employees and what to be prepared for kind of during these early days. So I think that was an interesting and kind of unique way. It wasn't just focused on their lane, which is IT security. They expanded that to understand, okay, their customers are thinking about more than just that one little sliver, and how can they add value and be useful beyond that.
That is unique. I mean, that is very, very much stand out. And so even though I may be doing and using some type of delivery mechanism, say a podcast, who's on that podcast in our discussion, isn't about, the product per se and continuing to bombard people with that particular message. I mean, that's a great example. Okay, so what you really talk about in the book to help with the standing out is to build core competencies in a framework, for B2B digital marketers. And you had the acronym for that particular model is value, and that helps them to stand out in this sea of sameness. So if you could just run us through what the frameworks and what those acronyms in the value model stand for.
Yes. Okay. So we did a lot of research. Let me just say that first. We ended up talking to dozens of one-on-one interviews with marketing leaders, business leaders, sales leaders across most of the U.S. and the U.K. And these were representative of a bunch of different industries. So that was kind of first and foremost. Then we did a survey because we wanted to also validate some of this information, getting from the perspective of the individual marketing and sales practitioners. And then, of course, our Sea of Sameness research, we ended up doing in the telecom industry. Then we expanded it to data center and UK universities. And so what we found was there was basically a competency gap. The reason that we believe Sea of Sameness is happening is because marketing and sales leaders don't actually have all of the competencies well-rounded, either in their own selves or on their teams. So I'll just kind of caveat that the model is meant to be, if you are an individual and you're the lone marketer or the lone salesperson, you can absolutely develop all of these. But if you are part of a team, then it's even more imperative that somebody on your team is representing each of these competencies, probably at a deeper level of expertise. So the framework is called value, and we love that word because we believe, in essence, what's the true purpose of a company? It's to add value to not only customers, but employees, to their community, to the partners. And so we love just thinking of and reminding ourselves that we are here to create value for other people. So the first is, it stands for V, value is visionary. And that's the ability really to just look ahead to see what's happening in the landscape and to kind of zoom out in this 50,000 foot view, but then zoom in as to what this means for your own industry or your customer's industry. So strategy, if you will, a lot of some of this stuff that's in the visionary is really akin to how companies end up developing their strategy. The A stands then for the other side of that, which is activator. And marketers will rate themselves really highly usually on this one of, it's execution, and I'm really good at that. But it's a little bit more than just execution. This is the ability to activate, to actually get the forces that you need and the team of people that you need to be successful in executing and to get the buy-in to drive your initiatives forward. So that's activator. The L stands for learner. And I think, 2020 was a great example of why this one's important, that everything is always changing. And just when, our marketing plans are approved at the beginning of 2020, and then 6 weeks into the year, the whole thing gets thrown out the window and we have to start over. So this is just having the pulse and a mindset to constantly be learning. The U stands for usefulness. And this is the ability to connect the dots between what your company does and why a customer would care about it, and kind of being the bridge between those two and explaining that. And then finally, the E is evaluator. And this one is, very prevalent in a lot of conversations happening right now, which is proving marketing ROI and, the impatience that people are having around marketing impact and how do we know if it's working or not. And so this is really having the integrity to look at your programs, through a set of data, but also just being able to analyze information that's coming in. I mean, we have no shortage of information. I think what's lacking is the ability to analyze that information and then to make decisions based on that. So this is, that's the value framework.
Well, and I think it's really important for us to really understand, because even, so I have, it's one of my passion projects. You and I talked about this before we started recording, is I have an online leadership academy for frontline supervisors in contact centers, because I that's the industry and space that I've worked in for a long time. And I just have this passion for helping young leaders to be more successful. And I developed this blended learning academy. And within that blended learning academy, one of the things that we talk a lot about is the difference between competencies and skills. Because unless you're in the adult learning space, you really don't, understand what the difference is of those two. and how one is essentially a bedrock foundation that enables another to occur. So if you could tell us a little bit about what is the difference between a B2B marketing competency and a B2B marketing skill?
Yes, well, I like to think of it as skills are what we need to learn to be successful in our jobs. So as a digital marketer, for example, that would be things like, you know, how to build ads in Facebook or Google, you know, how to do keyword searches, how to set up and manage, you know, an email system or a website. So those are kind of the skills elements that can be learned on what you need to do to be successful. The competencies then are more about how you do your job. So now that you know how to build a website, you know, how do you actually get the leadership team on board, for example? How do you get the information that you need so that you can get really strong copy? And this is more about how you're showing up to influence really the behaviors and implement the knowledge that you now have to kind of get everybody aligned.
I think that's a really good simplistic explanation, and for me, I'm going to borrow that from you. So for me, I also talk about it. You know, we have to have the competencies in order to skill to have the value and to be something that's going to have, you know, the ability for us to stand out and differentiate. You also talk about a difference between being differentiated and differentiation and distinctiveness. So if you could, from you thinking about from a B2B marketer perspective, help us understand what is the difference between differentiation and distinctiveness.
Yes, well, yeah. So we touched on this a little bit, but differentiation is essentially more at sort of that company level. It's either at the product, the approach. It's something that's not very easily copyable. And so, you know, I like there's a lot of consumer examples more so than B2B because, you know, they tend to come to life a little bit more in that way. But, you know, Southwest Airlines, at least in the United States, is an example where they are fanatical about the customer centric approach. And they go so far, it's not just marketing, you know, language. They go so far as to have practices on how they're hiring people and empathy tests that they require, you know, potential candidates to go through before they're even hired, so that they can test, is this going to be a good cultural fit? Are you going to be able to embody our culture and bring this thing to life in a unique way? And so that's not easily copyable. And some, you know, another organization could say that we're, you know, customer centric, which a lot of them do. But then the question is, well, what are we doing to prove that? So, you know, I like to look, you know, I like to think of it as like an onion where there's an outer layer and some of these claims that companies are making. And can you peel back the layer, you know, and go 5 or 6 or 7 layers deep to see how this is really being embodied? Then that becomes sort of that true differentiation. On the other hand is distinctiveness, and this is more about breaking through on marketing, you know, and advertising. So how clever are we being, and how creative are we being to get through all of the noise that's out there, and to communicate with people in a unique way? And that might be enough. We're not really even saying that every single company out there is going to be truly differentiated. I mean, there's few and far between of those examples that are living sort of that true differentiation. Distinctiveness is a lot more likely for companies to achieve. And I think that's exciting as a marketer and as a salesperson, that you can influence that, and that maybe your marketing and your sales approach and the way you're communicating with customers and the way that you're adding value there is actually the reason that people work with you. And so that could be, you know, versus the sort of bigger picture of like the product or a unique customer service approach, which tends to expand, like I mentioned before, beyond just marketing and sales. It's now, this is a CEO company driven initiative to, if you want to truly be differentiated.
Well, and as you're saying that, I started, you know, visualizing in my head that one is about, you know, the attractiveness and about obtaining a customer, and then the other one is about retaining the customer. That, I mean, to me, that's how I saw those two things go together when you were talking about it. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually gets to what, so our first book, Valueology, we talk about value and what does that mean? And so in essence, there's two parts to that equation. The first part is you are selling a promise. Value is not actually seen until the product is in use and implemented. And so essentially, people are buying a promise. Well, you said it was going to help my business grow, and you said it was going to help me be more productive. I trust you. I believe you. I'm willing to give you my money because that's the promise. That's the exchange. But I don't actually experience an increase in productivity or an increase in growth until I implement that tool or that approach. And that could be months or years down the line. And so there's kind of two parts to that equation, which is, are we going back to, we said all this stuff on the front end. Are we going back to check to make sure that we're actually delivering that?
I love that you bring up that example. I mean, I had this discussion with the CEO of an organization, and I asked him this question, and the question was, what do people say? And this is just put this in context. This is a software company. It's a SaaS-based software company. And I said, what are your customers saying, immediately once they sign the contract and buy your product? He immediately jumps into, well, it gives them greater, gains on this. It helps them to improve. I said, no. That's after they've already experienced and implemented the product. I want to know what they feel about the fact that they've just signed this agreement and have not had any realization, of the value of your product. And that was a question he had never had asked. And that was a question for him that he couldn't even answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
That's a bridge.
Right. Yes. I work with a lot of B2B organizations, and I have found there is a gap in customer knowledge. I mean, that's unfortunate, but a lot of marketing budgets are going to support more of the execution and not sort of that front-end knowledge gathering stage.
And so for me, when I started thinking about, well, if I want to attract even more customers, that's the information, that's the golden nuggets, because I want to ensure that we're heightening and highlighting, that feeling of, I just made the decision to choose you and to do work with you, and this is why. And so we have more people making that decision. But it was strange that was not even part of the thought process, because it's part of mine. Am I just that strange?
No, I think that's great. I think that's really insightful, and capitalizing, trying to bottle up whatever that feeling is, right? People are excited and they're in the moment. And I think that it brings up a really good point, that, another thing I'm seeing, which is marketers we spend so much energy and time on the creating awareness and creating demand and trying to get the conversation, that we forget about that immediate feeling of buyer's remorse that most of us have upon signing a deal or giving our credit card or, paying for something that there's a moment, there's a fearful moment where we are all saying, is this really going to be the answer? Is this thing really going to do what it said it's going to do? And we have to recognize that. And so, I like to go through sort of that full customer life cycle and journey to say, what's happening at that moment that you can send something that makes them feel really good, that just is reinforcing that they made a good decision and reinforcing the value they're about to receive, because they haven't gotten it yet. And you have to, be there knowing that they're feeling this remorse, because we all have it.
Yeah, we all do. I mean, so for me, it's, I think that there's a lot of uniqueness and opportunity that exists there, so that we can get some of the things that you said are so important. And that is the transformation piece, right? It's, creating the bridge, start getting into, the work that needs to be done, the transformation process. Cause, like for many of us, and we see it over and again, it's, we like the idea of what the possibilities are, but how to actually get there is where the struggle often commences. And that goes into that whole organizational piece. Okay. Now, I really want to get a little bit deeper into the value competency aspects of the framework, because I think for me, it was very enlightening to read the examples and read the different elements within that. And so in that visionary competency, you actually highlight that there's 5 elements that we need to be able to, build our capabilities in. And that's outside in, far sight, zooming, predicting, and imagining. And if you could, please, you and I had the discussion prior to recording about an example of an organization, how, different pieces of that organization, talking about verticals and things like that, impacted the ability for people who are doing the work to be able to actually build competencies in these areas, and it kind of stifled them. So if you could elaborate a little bit on this visionary competency and those 5 elements.
Yes. Okay. So let's see. The visionary competency. So as we talked about, I like to think of this as the one that, is looking far ahead and can see things that other people cannot. And, if the question is, well, how do we do that? So number one is this sort of outside in concept. I have worked with a lot of organizations where most of the information that is received is based on sort of an internal perspective. And there's a lot of knowledge that's being passed down, for example, from the sales team representing what do our customers think? Let's just ask our salespeople. And that becomes, quote, customer research. And so but this is really an interesting sort of dynamic, to consider that, I've have you ever sat in a meeting really there where people are speculating about what the customer wants or what the customer needs? And you may have some people that are so strongly opinionated that they are convincing everybody else that what they're saying is true. And nobody really questions it. But if you take a step back and think about for 1 second, wait a minute, is that person who just said that our target customer? Chances are, unless you're selling something really basic like toothpaste or, a toothbrush, that person who's representing the product team or the sales team or the finance team even is not the ideal target customer that you're trying to go after. So, just take that for a grain of salt. It's like that is one person's opinion. It's not necessarily the only opinion. So this one is really I feel passionate about because it's something that marketers can absolutely influence and impact, which is how much of our energy are we going to spend just speculating internally versus we went and commissioned a piece of research and now we have real data from our real customers because we talked to them and now we have this sort of outside in view. So that's kind of number one. Number two is farsight, and this is really just the ability to look down the road. So interestingly, I have found, and I've worked in a lot of large organizations, Fortune 500 companies, where there would be a separate, strategy department. And the goal of the strategy department is really to look several years out, 3 to 5 years out, while the rest of the organization tends to be very short-term focused. How are we closing deals this month? What are we doing this quarter? How are we going to meet our number this year? And I have to do a quarterly report or a quarterly earnings, and I got to go talk to the shareholders. What am I saying this quarter? And so that's a very sort of short-term focus versus that, having somebody that's looking far out to see what's happening in the landscape, not just in the industry that they are operating in, but in their customers' industries as well. And I think, COVID is a perfect example of this, where we have seen some industries like, 10x their growth because of what their product happened to be the right thing that people needed. But they're not experiencing that growth equally across all the industries that they serve. So, they're having to really digest that and say, oh, that's interesting. Retail, there was a big pause on retail and tourism. So if I was selling into retail and tourism, then my approach is going to be very different than if I'm selling into, telecom or some other software service that everybody all of a sudden needed, like Zoom. So that's farsight. Zooming then is like really the opposite of that. And it's kind of like being able to take all of that information, everything that's going in, like an eagle who scans the landscape and then boom, hones in on the prey and is able to kind of just zoom in and focus on that one thing. And so this is part of the visionary, where it's the ability to dissect that information, right, and analyze that information to make sure that it's kind of relevant to that particular business, because there's all these things we could do all the time. Well, we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. And so you need somebody that's, going to help you make that decision and kind of zoom in on that. That was number 3. What was number 4? Oh, predicting. So, this is interesting, like just the ability to figure out, kind of looking at past experiences, right, and talking to people across the business, and to be able to make some educated guesses about what may or may not occur and what may or may not happen. And so none of us have a crystal ball. So this one is a skill, essentially, that is the ability to put all those pieces of information that seem disparate and to say, okay, based on, history repeating itself, if we believe that, here's some things that might happen. Here's some possible scenarios or hypotheses, kind of like that, scientific experimentation method. And then finally is imagining. And this is, maybe when we think of a traditional visionary, we think, oh, it's this daydreamer who's always, imagining a different world. But I think this is really an interesting sort of skill set. And we see this in a lot of companies that value, for example, innovation. And so the question is, well, how much time and energy are you spending sort of just thinking about, what could be and what if scenarios that are positive and kind of playing out different realities, if you will. And so this, I think of, I have 2 kids, and I think of, and they're now in middle school, but this was when they were younger, always imagining, always, very, very imaginative. And somewhere along the way, we just kind of lose that. We go into, logical school mode, and now I just have to memorize things, and I'm not supposed to use my imagination unless I'm in art class, or music or something. But it is really, it's definitely a skill that can be developed. And really the funny thing is, I think for myself, at least, that I have found my most imaginative moments have been when I'm not doing any work. I'm not sitting in front of a computer. I'm not distracting myself with anything, but I'm, out on a walk or in the shower, or, something that is just like mindless, where your mind can kind of wander free for a little bit, and where you can kind of imagine all these different scenarios. So.
And I think it's important for us to point out that in much, much larger organizations, you could be in a particular role where, this visioning piece isn't as important, because I am handling, a particular, daily or weekly task or monthly task. However, if you're in a smaller organization, this absolutely becomes more important. If you want to take on, a role at a higher level, it becomes more important. And so for me in the academy that I was talking about, we talk about business acumen, which aligns to this, quite a bit. And one of the most areas of greatest deficiency, for people who are, looking to move up to higher levels of responsibility and create more value and stuff, it is business acumen. It is the visionary piece. And we have to be self-aware, to know that, hey, I need help in this area. This means I have to be a continuous learner. This means I have to be willing to test. This means I have to be willing to challenge in an effective way. There's a lot of elements that go into this that make this whole V piece, such a very important part of this framework. And I'm glad to see it at the beginning, and why I wanted to go deeper into it.
Yeah. And I would just say, like, a how-to, or, one thing that people can do to start developing this is just reading about, subscribe to one newsletter that is relevant to either your industry or to one of the customer segments that you serve. Yeah. So that you can start to get up to speed with what's happening, because there's a depth of knowledge really required. And the way to go deeper is to just start consuming this information to get an appreciation and understanding of how different industries are impacted by world events, for example. And one, do you even know what world events are happening? And so it's kind of having, staying up to speed and on pulse with that.
I think that's a really important point. And there's a lot of things that you're doing in this particular area to help, both individuals and teams and organizations to be able to build a lot of these skills. And that's something that, a lot of people are in need of. I mean, because of the rapidness of change, the the sea of sameness is continuing to get overcrowded. I talk about the whole blue ocean and red ocean thing, and there's a whole lot of red ocean areas for B2B people that they're just missing out and not able to see, the blue ocean opportunities that will help them be differentiated and distinctive. And so when I think about, things that we used to do, or maybe that we're stuck doing as a B2B marketer, what's something that we probably should be stopping?
Okay. So I would say so many things. Let me see if I can narrow it down to one. What a trend that I have seen is just, what I would call blind execution. A lot because like we were just talking about this visionary piece, and really it's understanding why we are doing certain things. So I would say let's stop the blind execution and ask ourselves, do we know what does good look like for this program? What are we trying to get out of it? And how do we know if it's working or not? And to be able to really just kind of dissect in there, because there's so much. I mean, I get called into a lot of companies, and the first thing I do is an audit. And I like to look at what are all the activities that you're doing and what's stressing you out, what's working. And typically what I found is that there's no connection. There's no golden thread throughout all of the programs. Everything is treated like a separate thing, a separate silo. And when that is the case, that gets very overwhelming very quickly. And so then I say, okay, what are some things that we can stop or put on hold for right now? That's just we don't think they're making a big impact. And, there's a lot of activity, a lot of campaigns, and a lot of ideas, frankly, that are coming from non-marketers across the organization that the marketing team feels responsible for executing. Well, the CEO had an idea. He saw a white paper that was published by one of our competitors, and now all of a sudden we have to go write a white paper. Not realizing that that's like an 8-week process, and we have to go find a subject matter expert, and if we want to do this really well, it's not a marketing brochure, it's actually deep thought leadership and and research that needs to go into this. But there is like this, this blind execution of like, I feel like I have to go execute every idea and everything that people are coming up with.
Especially when they're 4 levels above, right?
Yes. Yeah. And this is why that's why we love this framework, because I've actually seen this come to life where, you can shut down opinions and ideas that don't have anything to do with your strategy, because you go through methodically building the strategy and everybody gets on board. And it's this, miraculous thing where all of a sudden there's a relief, like, oh, marketing has a plan. I know exactly what we're trying to do. And not only did they just tell me the execution piece, yes, I always understood that. They gave me the context, the bookends, why we're doing it, why we think this is going to work, make me feel good that you've done some customer research, and then tell me about your plans to go execute.
Okay, so that helps me get into the point to where, and you even mentioned it in the book, is all these things are great, but without action, it's pretty much it's all a moot point. So if I'm thinking about I'm a B2B marketer, I'm looking at my budget, and I'm doing things that I shouldn't be doing. There's some things that I should be doing that I'm not. Where do I need to focus my resources and maybe reallocate some funds? And what do I need to be doing today? What does a B2B marketer need to do today to get rid of this sea of sameness?
Yeah. So the first and foremost, we've talked about it a few times, but I'll just reemphasize it here, is customer research. You have to have an element of your budget that is dedicated to conducting some real customer research. So that I feel very passionate about that, because I've seen sort of the light bulb go off when we present real customer research. When I talk to do a lot of one-on-one interviews, and going back and asking internally, what do you think your customers are going to say? What are your customers? How do they view you? Where do you think you're adding value? And then getting real feedback from customers and presenting that back. I can tell you only in one case were those 100% aligned. And the other 99% of them they're missing some element. So it's a great way to bring people together and to start gaining alignment on not only programs and campaigns, but it just gives this added boost of confidence, not only for the organization, but for the marketer. to be able to present this back and to say, you guys, we know what our customers want. We know what our customers need. And now we have a plan. We can go start to deliver against some of these things. So I would say, first and foremost, it's definitely reallocating, making sure that there's budget for customer research, just so that you also have the confidence to say no to some of those, great ideas that come across your desk on a daily basis from the rest of the organization. So that would be what I would say.
Stacey Danheiser, I'm glad we finally had the opportunity to chat, and I see us having some more discussions in the future, because you had mentioned something that is so true, that you've done tons of research. There is so much depth to this book, so much insight. I'm really excited about having further discussions. But before we do that, how does the B2B DM gang get in touch with you?
Yes, well, I would love to connect on LinkedIn, Stacey Danheiser. And then my website is shakemktg.com. I'm in the process of launching a brand new marketing community as well that I would love to have everyone join. And you can get more information on my website, www.shakemktg.com.
Stacey Danheiser, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.